December 10th, 2021. Pitch black night in western Kentucky. Seconds before impact, the air in Mayfield seems to hold its breath. Sirens wail in the distance, and a power outage turns the streets to shadows. Over the fields, a supercell spins deliberately, and on the radar screen, the vortex reveals its signature of debris. At 9:26 p.m. Central Time, the vortex moves toward the heart of the city. The courthouse clock, soon to be torn from its tower, marks a time that is about to disappear. The silhouette of the water tower, towering a moment ago, will be twisted into twisted metal rings. At the candle factory, night shift workers seek refuge among tables and shelves. The wind begins to speak in a deep, continuous tone, as if the entire earth were vibrating. In a matter of seconds, the border between before and after will be traced by a corridor of devastation that many will remember for a lifetime. The night of December 10th, 2021 wasn't just the story of a tornado. It was the central chapter of a mega outbreak that crossed 6 states in the United States, leaving such a vast trail that in the days that followed, weather satellites showed swathes of destruction visible from space. In less than 24 hours, more than 70 tornadoes were confirmed, some isolated and others part of a single storm system that seemed to never end. It all began in the late afternoon, when a cold front from Canada was moving southeast, encountering an unusually warm tropical air mass that had climbed into the Mississippi and Ohio valleys. The collision wasn't sudden, but painstakingly violent. At the heart of this interaction, several supercells began to form, each rotating with the precision of a perfect gear. The deadliest of all would emerge in Arkansas, and hours later, it would be the one that would strike Mayfield. On its journey, the system tore through communities like Monette and Leachville in Arkansas, destroying homes, factories, and farm warehouses. It then crossed the Mississippi River, gaining even more strength as it entered Kentucky. As the night wore on, meteorological teams tracked what would soon be described as a long-track tornado, a phenomenon where a single vortex remains active for hundreds of miles, rather than dissipating and regenerating. In Kentucky, the supercell found a perfect corridor, no major geographic obstacles, and an atmosphere that continued to feed it with heat and moisture. Unlike other outbreaks, where storms compete with each other for energy, here everything seemed aligned for it to advance without resistance. Eyewitness accounts from that night describe a moonless sky, illuminated only by flashes of lightning that revealed the tornado's silhouette, a dark cone surrounded by flashes. Emergency stations broadcast radio alerts. Tornado confirmed on the ground, moving northeast at over 100 kilometers per hour. This speed drastically reduced the reaction time for communities in its path. While Mayfield was preparing, other towns were hit by secondary tornadoes. Bowling Green, further east, would suffer its own deadly blow. Dawson Springs, another Kentucky community, would be devastated, with much of its urban area leveled. In total, the massive outbreak left more than 90 dead across all affected states, one of the highest numbers for a winter event in modern U.S. history. Meteorological records show that the main tornado, the one that struck Mayfield, maintained an EF4 intensity for much of its path. This means that in some sections, the winds could uproot mature trees, disintegrate solid frame homes, and hurl debris for distances of more than a kilometer. In rural areas, the swath of destruction was more than 1,500 meters wide, a corridor that, viewed from the air, resembled a perfectly defined scar. The mega outbreak was unusual not only for the number and strength of the tornadoes, but also for its geographic extent. From northeastern Arkansas to western Kentucky, passing through parts of Tennessee, Illinois, Missouri, and Mississippi, the affected areas spanned thousands of square kilometers. This scale complicated the emergency response. State authorities had to divide resources among multiple critical areas, while communications and power outages cascaded. In Mayfield, the storm wasn't an isolated visitor. It was part of an atmospheric onslaught that was simultaneously hitting other towns. This meant that aid couldn't be immediately deployed. Roads were blocked by trees, poles, and debris, and many local rescue teams had also been direct victims of the disaster. For meteorologists, the night of December 10th was a mixture of scientific fascination and humanitarian horror. Doppler radars showed a debris ball, a characteristic signature of large tornadoes, where fragments of structures, trees, and objects are lifted to great heights, visible even at more than 3,000 meters above the ground. This intense and persistent signal indicated that the tornado was tearing and lifting everything in its path. In the hours that followed, as the storm system finally weakened, the tally began. Official figures would speak of more than 57 deaths in Kentucky directly related to the tornado, with hundreds injured and thousands of buildings destroyed. But behind those numbers, each community had its own inventory of losses: family photos, generations-old businesses, historic churches, memories impossible to replace. The massive outbreak of December 10th, 2021 was more than a meteorological phenomenon. It was a brutal lesson in how, under certain conditions, the atmosphere can unleash a chain of events so powerful that even the most advanced technology cannot stop them. The only thing left to do is anticipate, warn, and above all, resist. In the industrial heart of Mayfield on Industrial Drive stood the Mayfield Consumer Products Candle Factory, a low-ceilinged building with spacious interiors. It was December, and demand for scented candles for the holidays was at its peak. That night, around 110 people were working the overnight shift, sorting boxes, packing orders, and operating production lines. Outside, the air was seasonally warm. Inside, the smell of melted wax and Christmas fragrances permeated the air. The first warnings had arrived hours earlier, a high risk of severe thunderstorms and the possible formation of tornadoes. Some workers recalled that, at the start of their shift, the radio news reported the advance of a dangerous system. However, production did not stop. The candles had to be shipped before the next morning. At 9:27 p.m., the situation changed from a threat to a certainty. The National Weather Service confirmed that a high-intensity tornado was heading directly toward Mayfield. The sound of emergency sirens filled the streets, and inside the plant, supervisors began directing everyone to safety. The designated safe area was interior hallways away from exterior walls, although no underground shelter existed. Within minutes, the storm arrived. The winds blew with such force that they seemed to bend metal like paper. The massive roof beams began to twist, and the thunder of flying objects clashed with the continuous roar of the tornado. Some workers tried to take cover under tables or heavy shelving. Others hugged the ground, hands on their heads. Then the roof collapsed. In an instant, darkness was total, broken only by flashes of lightning and sparks from torn electrical wires. The air filled with dust, fragments of wood, pieces of sheet metal, and tragically lit candles that fell and ignited small fires. The walls began to collapse in a chain reaction, trapping those who didn't manage to move in time. Survivors would later describe the noise as so deafening that orders and shouts were lost in a sea of wind and destruction. In less than a minute, the industrial warehouse was a mass of rubble, twisted machinery, and crushed crates. As the tornado continued northeast, it left behind a silence broken only by wails and pleas for help. The first to arrive were neighbors who, despite the rain and the risk of more storms, began moving pieces of concrete and metal with their bare hands. Shortly after, local rescue teams arrived, although access was difficult due to blocked streets. The search operation continued throughout the night and into the following days. 8 deaths were confirmed at the plant and dozens were injured, some seriously. Personal stories emerged like open wounds. Parents working alongside their children, colleagues forming human chains to pull others from the rubble, people trapped for hours under the weight of beams and walls. The candle factory tragedy quickly became a symbol of the night of December 10th. Not only because of the magnitude of the human loss, but also because of the questions it raised. Should the operation have been suspended given the warnings? Were there sufficient protocols in place to protect workers in the event of a tornado? In the days that followed, state and federal authorities investigated the circumstances. Some employees stated that they were warned they could be fired if they left work before the end of their shift, something the company denied. The controversy added a layer of public outrage to an event already marked by grief. The psychological impact was profound, Many of the survivors couldn't return to the site without reliving the moments when the building collapsed on them. The community held candlelight vigils, this time lit as a symbol of memory, not as merchandise, in front of the plant's remains. In the devastated landscape of Mayfield, the candle factory was a visible reminder of the vulnerability of human lives to the forces of nature, but also of the human choices that can increase or decrease that risk. The structure, once a work and production space, was left as a twisted steel skeleton, surrounded by glass shards and hardened wax that clung to the pavement as a silent testament to the night everything changed. In the meteorological memory of the United States, few events simultaneously combined scientific rarity and destructive brutality like the tornado that ripped through Mayfield on the night of December 10, 2021. The anomaly begins with its date. December, a month when severe storms are typically a distant echo of summer, not a centerpiece. Historically, most of the most intense tornadoes in the region occur between April and June, when the atmosphere is at its most tense between warm, humid air from the Gulf and cold, northerly currents. But on that day, the calendar became irrelevant. The explanation begins thousands of feet above the ground. An unusually warm air mass was rising from the Gulf of Mexico, pushing temperatures in Kentucky to record-breaking levels for a winter day, more than 20 degrees Celsius. At the same time, a jet stream, that wind highway that snakes through the upper atmosphere, was accelerating strongly, providing the shear needed to transform ordinary storms into rotating machines. It was as if all the ingredients for a large-scale tornado had come together in the middle of winter. The result was a long-lived supercell, one of those rotating storms capable of spawning a single tornado that travels for hours without losing strength. This one, in particular, became a relentless predator, with a trajectory that in Kentucky reached approximately 266 kilometers. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of driving from Louisville to Nashville with barely a lift on the gas. But instead of asphalt leaving a trail of destruction, meteorologists classified it as an F4 on the enhanced Fujita scale, meaning estimated winds of up to 305 kilometers per hour. That speed doesn't just tear off roofs or demolish walls. It can uproot entire foundations and toss vehicles around like toys. Subsequent satellite images showed a brown scar crisscrossing fields and towns, a wide, uniform path that betrayed the intensity of a phenomenon rare in its seasonality but also in its duration. The statistics back this up. Tornadoes with such long paths are exceptional in any month, but in December, they are almost a statistical rarity. Since reliable records have existed, very few have traveled more than 200 kilometers, and even fewer have maintained such high intensity for so many continuous hours. National Weather Service meteorologists compared it to the legendary tri-state tornado of 1925, not because it matched its record, but because it evoked the same sensation, a single atmospheric monster capable of wiping out entire towns in a single night. In the popular imagination, winter tornadoes are usually less dangerous than spring ones. However, this event challenged that notion. The thermal contrast between tropical and Arctic air not only existed, but was amplified by a global weather pattern influenced by a La Niña event. This favored more intense storms and an unusual southward shift of the jet stream. In other words, the atmosphere was as taut as a violin string, and that night someone plucked it hard. For Mayfield residents, the strange thing wasn't just the timing or the strength, it was the speed with which everything changed. In a matter of minutes, they went from hearing the wail of sirens to feeling the atmospheric pressure drop. Their ears pop, and a deep, steady roar fill every street. Many described it as not the typical whistling of wind. It was like a freight train passing through your house, they recounted afterward. That sound is in itself a physical sign of the magnitude of the winds as it comes from whole objects being ripped, compressed, and thrown against other surfaces. The strangeness was also measured by the survivors. At the candle factory in the city center, in centuries-old homes that had withstood decades of storms, no one imagined that a December tornado could erase history in seconds. At that hour, many families were watching television, preparing late dinners, or putting up Christmas decorations. Outside, festive lights competed with the flashing lightning, an ironic contrast between celebration and threat. Even for emergency responders, what happened that night was an unusual challenge. Protocols and resources are typically focused on peak tornado season, and the fact that the phenomenon occurred during a cold month meant that many people didn't have an active shelter plan. Furthermore, the combination of mild temperatures and intense winds made it difficult for radar and models to accurately predict the exact time and location of impact. Although there were advance warnings, the actual intensity surprised even the most experienced meteorologists. In retrospect, the Mayfield tornado wasn't just unusual for being a winter predator. It was unusual because it seemed to combine every possible anomaly: an atypical month, an exceptionally long path, devastating intensity, and a social and cultural context unprepared for a catastrophe of that magnitude at that time of year. Residents of the region learned that the atmosphere doesn't respect calendars and that sometimes meteorological history is written on the most unexpected dates. The strangeness, however, is no consolation. In Mayfield, the word December ceased to be synonymous with celebration and relaxation. Since then, for many, it has become a reminder that nature can rewrite any script, even the most unlikely. Before that night, Mayfield was a town of just over 10,000 people in Graves County, western Kentucky. Founded in the 19th century, it had grown as an agricultural and industrial center, surrounded by fields of corn, soybeans, and tobacco. The downtown streets were lined with historic brick buildings, family-owned businesses, centuries-old churches, and a courthouse with a clock tower that dominated the skyline. Winter nights were quiet. Christmas lights adorned the homes, and the murmur of conversation escaped from local cafes and restaurants. The heart of Mayfield was not just a geographical point, but a center of community life. On Saturdays, the main square was filled with fairs and markets. In December, schools organized concerts and churches set up live nativity scenes. Neighbors knew each other by first and last name, and relationships were close enough that a simple walk involved several greetings and brief conversations. Everything changed in a matter of seconds. The tornado swept through the southwest, cutting a swath of destruction more than a kilometer wide. The gusts, equivalent to those of a Category 5 hurricane, disintegrated structures that had withstood decades of adverse weather. Entire houses were ripped from their foundations. Cars were blown off their feet and landed tens of meters away. Trees over 100 years old were snapped like dead branches. Downtown, the courthouse suffered catastrophic damage. The clock tower, a symbol of the city, was ripped off and thrown into the street. Historic businesses were reduced to collapsed walls and piles of bricks. The Broadway Methodist Church lost much of its roof and stained glass windows, leaving it exposed to the night sky. The water tower, which for generations had been a landmark visible for miles, ended up twisted and collapsed on a vacant lot. In the days that followed, aerial images showed a stark contrast. On one side of the path, entire neighborhoods remained intact. On the other, only empty lots covered in debris remained. The surgical precision with which the tornado leveled some areas and left others almost unscathed baffled even veteran meteorologists. The aftermath wasn't just a different physical landscape, but a profound transformation in the lives of its inhabitants. Thousands were left homeless in a single night. Entire families took refuge in school gymnasiums, churches, and temporary shelters. The electricity grid was down for weeks in some areas. Water and gas supplies were interrupted, forcing the creation of improvised kitchens and resource distribution points. The local economy suffered a severe blow. Small businesses that had already weathered the COVID-19 pandemic now faced total losses. Some factories resumed operations months later, others never reopened. Farmers, although less severely impacted in infrastructure, lost equipment and stored crops. The estimated cost of damage in Mayfield exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars, a huge figure for a city of its size. But alongside the devastation, a different face of the community also emerged, one marked by solidarity. Neighbors offered their homes to displaced families. Restaurants cooked with what was left in their stockpiles to feed volunteers and victims, and people from all over the country sent donations. Religious organizations, National Guard soldiers, and civilian volunteers worked side by side to clear streets, remove debris, and rebuild homes. Even so, reconstruction wasn't swift. Even a year later, empty lots and ruined buildings served as reminders of the extent of the tragedy. For many, the aftermath became an ongoing process of mourning and resilience. Some chose to leave, unable to relive each day the place where they had lost everything. Others stayed, determined to rebuild their city, even if it was brick by brick. The December tornado didn't just erase structures, it changed Mayfield's collective memory. The town's square was no longer just a gathering place, but a place of remembrance and vigils. The Christmas lights that once heralded the start of the festive season were now lit in memory of those who didn't survive. The town that existed before that night was captured in photographs and memories, while the new Mayfield was built on the visible and invisible scars of the disaster. The night of December 10th, 2021, left in Mayfield more than just a record of material damage. It left uncomfortable questions and a collective urgency to learn. The tornado that devastated the town was not an isolated event, but part of a massive outbreak that affected several states in the central and southern United States, claiming more than 80 lives in total. Meteorologists classified it as a long-track tornado, with a path of more than 200 kilometers, an unusually persistent phenomenon for the region and time of year. Historically, the most intense tornadoes in Kentucky occurred in spring, when the contrast between cold air from the north and warm air from the south reached its peak. However, this outbreak occurred in the middle of meteorological winter, under surprisingly high temperatures for December. The warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, combined with a powerful low-pressure system and shearing winds aloft, created an explosive scenario for supercell formation. Experts from the National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center noted that while no extreme weather event can be attributed solely to climate change, there is a growing pattern. Warmer winters, less predictable tornado seasons, and severe storms occurring outside of their typical seasons. A report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that global warming increases the availability of moisture and energy in the atmosphere, which could favor more intense and long-lasting storms. For Mayfield, the first lesson was one of preparation. Many of its buildings lacked adequate shelters. Early warnings worked, but there weren't always safe places to go. Sirens, though active, didn't reach everyone, especially those indoors with the noise of machinery. The candle factory tragedy revealed that workplace safety policies for tornadoes were insufficient and sparked a national debate about whether companies should suspend operations in the face of severe weather threats. The second lesson was about infrastructure. Blocked streets, downed power lines, and disrupted communication systems hampered rescue efforts. Local authorities began rethinking urban design, considering the installation of community shelters and improvements to the structural strength of schools, hospitals, and public buildings. The third lesson, more silent but equally profound, was about community resilience. Despite the magnitude of the disaster, the citizen response demonstrated that the strength of a community is not measured only by its walls, but by the ties that sustain it. The volunteer networks, the makeshift kitchens, and the spontaneous fundraising efforts reminded us that in the midst of chaos, solidarity is the most valuable resource. Regarding climate change, the Mayfield case has become a study material for climatologists and urban planners. It's not about claiming that global warming created the tornado, but rather about understanding that a warmer, wetter climate can facilitate conditions for extreme events at times and places where they were previously less likely. In this sense, Mayfield is a warning written in broken bricks and twisted beams. The line between the possible and the probable is shifting. Today, years later, as new buildings rise downtown and the streets once again fill with life, the memory of that night remains vivid. The scars on the city are visible, but so is the determination not to forget the lessons learned. In every newly built community shelter, every school drill, every weather report that receives more attention than before, there is an echo of the night when the wind shaped Mayfield's destiny. History doesn't just record what happened, it also warns of what can happen again. And in that sense, the December 2021 tornado isn't just a dark page in Kentucky's annals. It's a chapter in the global narrative of a changing climate and a reminder that preparation, science, and community are the best defenses against a sky that sometimes decides to test its limits. If you're passionate about discovering the relentless force of nature and learning the stories behind the planet's most extreme tornadoes, don't forget to subscribe to Extreme Tornado. Activate the notification bell and join us on each journey to the eye of the storm, where we analyze, explain, and document the phenomena that leave their mark on the Earth and on history.